The strength of the ancient Roman Empire and their unrivaled military prowess were well known throughout the world. The vast empire was also unified by amazing discoveries and advancements in science, medicine, philosophy, technology, and architecture. But despite all this, the ancient Romans were infamous for their dreadful hygiene despite all the advancements they had made in technology and medicine, which allowed them to build some amazing structures for their bathhouses and sanitation systems. It was no surprise that they had a variety of parasites and diseases that ran rampant throughout their kingdom because their medical treatments were revolting, their diet was disgusting, and their everyday hygiene habits were abhorrent. Welcome to History Rediscovered. In this episode, we discuss the disturbing practices that were considered normal in ancient Rome. Roman toilets were dangerous places. Life-threatening, infested toilets. While the restrooms were frequently connected with trepidation and approached with utmost caution, the ancient Roman baths were associated with leisure and calm. The famous aqueducts, which served as the Roman Empire's general sewage system, were stunning, but the toilets themselves were a different matter. These were a collection of badly built, dimly illuminated tunnels that were connected to sewer channels. As the trail was clear, deadly creatures frequently emerged from the holes. In addition, methane accumulation frequently resulted in naked flames. The Romans used superstitions to protect themselves before going to the lavatory. Curses were written on the bathroom walls to fend off evil spirits and bad luck. They also held the belief that laughter drove demons away, which is why hilarious artwork, such as ones depicting Jesus as a fish, were frequently scrawled on the lavatory walls. Fortuna, the goddess of luck, seems to have had an unique affinity with toilet users, according to archaeologist and Kalowski-Ostro. Maybe you asked her for a good bowel movement in your prayers. Maybe as you sat over your open sewers, you prayed to her to keep a fire from tickling your bottom or a mouse from biting you. I've discovered from my investigations into public restrooms that they must have been pretty filthy, with pee and excrement covering the seats and the floor. Undoubtedly not an area where one would want to spend a lot of time. However, examining Roman excrement has revealed how absolutely awful these standards were for people at the time. In fact, archaeologists have found tons of parasites and infections in fossilized Roman poop, including roundworm and dysentery. In addition, the Romans, frugal people that they were, didn't dispose of a lot of the excrement they had access to. Instead, they used it to fertilize their crops, which recycled their bowels back onto their food. And their version of ketchup, a favorite condiment, was an uncooked, fermented fish sauce called garum. This beloved solution might have allowed tapeworm parasites to thrive. One sponge for everyone. Picking between pottery shards or a shared bathroom sponge. The ordinary ancient Roman who had just taken care of business in the bathroom would grab for a tossorium, which was a natural sponge affixed to one end of a stick, instead of toilet paper or a bidet. Before using it to clean themselves, they would rinse the tool, sponge first, in a nearby bucket of vinegar or salt water. Then, they would set it aside for the following person to use. The Romans were willing to employ this method of sanitation in public restrooms, since they had little to no understanding of how diseases propagated. Because of this, if one user had intestinal worms, the other users would bring the same parasite home and infect a large number of other people. The Greek word pessoi, which means pebbles, was a substitute for the tossorium. It was shattered porcelain that had been recut from old broken ceramics to provide smooth angles that would lessen anal damage. Some researchers claim that people frequently wrote the names of their foes on the shards before wiping their behinds with them. This practice was thought to be a way to curse their adversaries. Urine for whitening teeth. Many Romans in antiquity would catch their pee and keep it in jars. They didn't use it to wash their clothes or brush their teeth until it was sterile and had turned into ammonia. The Romans placed a high emphasis on clean garments and teeth, despite their dubious hygiene habits. They felt it would be wasteful to dispose of ammonia when it was so freely available to them organically. They washed their clothes with urine. Here's the ancient version of a dry cleaner, a fuller, who used urine to clean clothes. It sounds disgusting. But ammonia, a key ingredient in human-made water, is great at getting tricky stains out of togas. And, unlike soap, it was easy to acquire. Fullers could just put vessels on street corners, and men who needed to pass water could contribute their services by using into the buckets. The 1st century Roman Emperor Vespasian famously instated a urine tax, raking in a bunch of cash by taxing the public bins where people dumped urine collected from toilets, and the tax was quite lucrative. Some even credit it with saving the empire at a particularly precarious time. When Vespasian's son, the future Emperor Titus, expressed his displeasure at this governmental initiative, his dad held a piece of money from the first payment to his son's nose, asking whether its odor was offensive to him, according to Suetonius. Titus, of course, said no, and Vespasian famously replied, "Yet it comes from urine." Poop as an energizing and healing agent. Because the ancient Romans lacked access to bandages or medical gauze, they devised an alternative method of treating their wounds: applying animal excrement. In the spring, the best excrement was gathered, dried, and preserved for medicinal use. It was moreover cooked with vinegar or broken into a powder and included to drinks as an energizing ingredient. Some of the most affluent and noble ancient Romans believed that animal feces had rejuvenating properties. They reused bathwater. The baths of the ancient Romans were works of art where the visitor might stroll about, experiencing each cold, hot, tepid, or steam bath. They had huge colonnades, exquisite mosaics, and pools with different temperatures. They were very elaborate. Romans in these regions valued baths much, and it was common practice to frequent bathhouses every day for social and hygiene reasons. People typically used olive oil to clean themselves in these public bathhouses, scraping the oil off to remove grime and dead skin. The same oil was kept and applied to numerous bathhouse visitors. In certain baths, the water was only seldom changed, and might accumulate a scum on the surface from human trash and cosmetics, say archaeologists. The water in the baths was typically kept warm or hot, making it the perfect environment for several types of bacteria and parasites to multiply and spread. Obscense graffiti. Archaeologists have discovered some of the dirtiest erotic graffiti and artwork on the walls and floors of ancient Rome. In the Roman Empire, the phallus symbol was virtually everywhere. It could be found on statues, wind chimes, necklaces, and amulets for children, as well as in carvings, mosaics, and graffiti. Together with their artistic works, the Romans frequently inscribed derogatory statements on public walls, much like the majority of the graffiti one can find today. Ancient birth control was weird and dangerous, but sometimes effective. Giving birth in ancient Rome was extremely dangerous for both mother and baby. Infections, hemorrhaging, and other complications were unfortunately common. Not interested in taking your chances on childbirth? Birth control options were available, but they were strange, to say the least. According to the physician Serenus, it helped in preventing conception to smear the orifice of the uterus all over before with olive oil or honey or cedar resin, or juice of the balsam tree, alone or together with white lead, or with a moist cerate containing myrtle oil and white lead, or before the act with moist alum, or with galbanum together with wine, or to put a lock of fine wool into the orifice of the uterus. Many of these methods were possibly effective, since they served to block access to the uterus. Dinner parties took place in piles of shells and animal bones. Thomas, while the existence of vomitoriums, where Romans would intentionally purge themselves, is merely a myth, dinner parties were still pretty gross by modern standards. At elite parties, guests would eat while reclining on sofas, where they'd just toss animal bones, skins, seafood shells, olive pits, and any other refuse on the ground for slaves to clean up. Ladies rubbed dead skin cells of gladiators on their faces. The gladiators who lost became medicine for epileptics, while the winners became aphrodisiacs. In Roman times, soap was hard to come by, so athletes cleaned themselves by covering their bodies in oil and scraping the dead skin cells off with a tool called a strigil. Usually, the dead skin cells were just discarded, but not if you were a gladiator. Their sweat and skin scrapings were put into a bottle and sold to women as an aphrodisiac. Often, this was worked into a facial cream. Women would rub the cream all over their faces, hoping the dead skin cells of a gladiator would make them irresistible to men.